Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Future Solving.
Real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been a big fan of your work for a long time, and it's exciting to meet you and be able to talk about your work contextualized, especially I think today in this era of AI and people focusing on innovation through the lens of technology. And obviously, I know you have a different point of view on that. And I'd love for you to share, kind of your thoughts on what you're seeing when, as companies around the world are trying to come up with, what do we do about AI? I'm guessing you have a very specific perspective on maybe where they're getting it wrong and maybe some of them are getting it right.
Well, I think AI is a very powerful technology, but it remains a technology. And usually technology is not the problem. So what companies get wrong is that they need a leadership to embrace the opportunities that come from the technology. So innovation is always bottom up, teams doing stuff, and top down, just leadership. So the bottom up is relatively easy. It's about processes, how do you explore? But the top down, giving space to experimentation, to try new stuff, that's what's hard. And so there's some challenges there, where it's really not a technology challenge, it's a leadership challenge and a structural challenge. So that's the thing that companies are not yet very good at.
And what do you feel like the biggest reason for that is? Why do you think they're struggling with that?
I'd say that most companies, maybe not generalized, but a lot of companies that I see are led by managerial CEOs and not entrepreneurial CEOs. Now, those companies that have a relatively young history, still have the entrepreneur as the CEO or as the chairman, they have entrepreneurial leadership, experimentation, trying out new stuff. Now, there is a very rare breed of entrepreneurial CEOs who weren't entrepreneurs, who come into companies and change things. I think Bracken Darrell did that at Logitech for quite some time. But there's a general lack of entrepreneurial CEOs who are world-class at running a company, and at the same time, they experiment a lot with new opportunities. That is not what I see most in the companies I get to work with, but it's changing. It's changing.
It's changing. That's exciting that the tides are, maybe even a slight turning of the tides. Probably part of the reason, systemically, that we don't have a lot of entrepreneurial senior executives that can run large companies and be entrepreneurial is the degree of operational expertise required and being an operator, right? So when you meet with operators or with leaders, let's say there's obviously a full spectrum of like problem aware versus not aware. Let's assume they're aware. Let's assume that they know that they need to change. And they say, Alex, please, like all we know how to do is just look at the P&L and drive out like small inefficiencies and like, what do we got to do to be able to change the way that we think to be a bit more entrepreneurial?
So I think the challenge is a bit that, this topic of the ambidextrous organization has been around in academia, but it hasn't been translated to practice. And, I think leaders intuitively know that running a company and inventing the future, innovation are different, but they don't know how. So I have CEOs of very large companies telling me, Alex, I do not know how exploration works. And that's not because they're not smart. These are brilliant people, but their whole career, they've been managers. Right. They've been managing companies. So all of the KPIs, key performance indicators, are trimmed to managing. And then the companies are trimmed to run a business model or a small portfolio of known business models. Anything that looks different gets killed. And so you call it corporate antibodies. So what I help these leaders understand is, how do you do explore and exploit at the same time? So it's just a different wording for the theme of ambidextrous. But I think what's different is we tried to make it very practical. What kinds of KPIs do you have in exploit? What kinds of KPIs do you have in explore? How do you invest in exploit? Projects where you know they're going to succeed, right? Business plans. Business plans are the death penalty of innovation when you explore. So you need a different approach. It's not about giving people money and putting sticky notes up there or buying ping pong tables.
But I love sticky notes.
I love sticky notes too, but it's about the system and the process. The process, bottom up, what should teams do to experiment and de-risk? And top down, what should leaders do to enable experimentation rather than just execution? Execution is great, you can never compromise, but exploring the future is radically different. So you need systems for that, you need leadership for that, you need a different culture that coexists with an execution culture. It's not either or, it's and that's the hard part.
So talk to me about that. If you have a company, let's say, that's structured the way that most companies are structured today, and let's say you have like godlike powers where you're like they're like, Alex, you tell us exactly what to do. which obviously we do tell them exactly what to do, but often they don't do it. But let's say you know for sure that if you put in the time and effort to think through this and give them a proposed restructure, that they're going to do it. What would that be?
Actually, they do it. So some of the companies we work with, they really start, and it does have to come top down in addition to the bottom up. Bottom up part is relatively straightforward. So the first thing is define innovation. So we say innovation as if we knew what it meant. It means something else for everybody. And the first challenge is when you say innovation, a lot of people think technology. But what they're talking about is invention. And when you say AI, well, technology, AI doesn't create value per se. It's just a means to an end. Now, AI is very powerful. With Gen AI, you can do crazy stuff, being around machine learning and so. But what you really want to focus on is what I like to call business R&D or commercial innovation. How do you create value for customers and your business? Two very straightforward, simple topics with technology. So first define, what is innovation for you? Is it just R&D? Is it, like business R&D, new value propositions, new business models? Once you define that, then the leadership part starts where I explain how explore and exploit is different. And it starts all with investments. In the exploit part, when you run a company, you analyze an opportunity and you make a big investments with a business plan. It's an execution challenge. In exploration, here's the kicker. You want big returns, but if you give people a lot of money, guess what they're going to do? They're going to waste it. They're going to build something that nobody wants. Give engineers and scientists a lot of money, they're going to burn it. Engineers want to build something, scientists want to do research. So what you really need to do is give a large amount of teams small amounts of money to start exploring. And after 3 months, you kill at least half of the projects. What do they need to do? They just need to prove that customers have a problem, that the problem they want to address actually exists. And teams that can't show that evidence, fine, they do something else. And 50% will disappear. And then you double down very quickly with money for those teams that have evidence. Then they need to prove that the customers care about the solution. You need to prove that you can make money, willingness to pay, all that pre-building, pre-scaling.
Right.
So it becomes like a funnel, like we know in venture capital. So you basically build that kind of investment system within a company. When you do that, you automatically transform the culture. You'll have tons of teams that will explore, and you will do great capital allocation because you constantly kill projects that don't go anywhere. So we actually introduce kill rates to kill projects that don't have evidence. Because it's not about the idea. Yeah, ideas don't matter. It's all about the evidence that supports the idea. Customers care about, the value proposition, they're willing to pay. Those things can be proven before you actually scale. So that is, again, is not rocket science. It's actually back to basics, but it does require a leadership that is fully committed to actually do that. It's what we call business R&D.
Called business R&D.
Business R&D or commercial innovation, whatever works for the company. You need to use the company's words.
That's right. Help get it in their language, right? I love that because I think, it's so funny to think about what you're talking about contrasted with the number of projects that have even been scaled to millions and millions of dollars where there's no evidence of an actual customer problem, or even if there's evidence of the problem, willingness to pay. Right?
And I ask, the illustration of that is at every conference I'll ask, how many of you are working on a project that you know is not going to deliver on the results you expect? They're not going to completely fail, but they're going to make 10 million instead of 100 million or a billion. Teams know. So then I ask, well, why are you still working on that stuff? Well, it's not them. These are smart people. It's the process. So nobody will take the risk to kill a project because we're trimmed to execute. So one person...
We're measured on our execution.
We measure on execution. I remember one person told me, in our company, it's really hard to get money. But once you get money, it's hard to stop getting money. So that's why we introduce a kill rate. And you need to make it safe to fail and safe to explore, the whole Amy Edmondson stuff around psychological safety. And you do that simply by introducing the right kind of metrics that customers have. Show me the evidence that customers have a problem. Show me the evidence that they're willing to pay. And if the team can't, you kill the project. Super simple.
So that makes, first of all, I love hearing that. That's a great process. And I love the framing of it as business R&D because you're right. So often all the R&D is technology R&D or scientific R&D. Like we're all used to that.
And there's still value to that, right? It's a means to an end. So we don't want to kill that.
No.
We want to take part of that budget. And I think 5% of that budget is largely sufficient. You don't need 50%. 5% is
yeah,
enough.
I mean, I know at Microsoft we had a whole department that would first, it was like a funnel where there'd first be the scientific and technological R&D.
Yep.
And then if there was a breakthrough, then multiple potential businesses would be spun up. But I think a lot of them were funded a bit early before showing evidence of customer problem and willingness to pay.
And if you take Microsoft, it's actually a great example. You had another challenge there. So you have a world-class R&D function, like world-class, forever. You have the smartest people on the planet. But Microsoft famously missed out on every innovation.
Right.
Well, why did that happen? It's because there was such a powerful business model around, Windows and Office.
Yeah.
So nothing else could really survive unless leadership would be willing to explore other things. Right. So it was not an idea problem. It was not a technology problem. It was a systems problem. And that changed with the shift in leadership with Satya Nadella. Now, that same function is leveraged. So it's a very good illustration that you can have huge R&D budgets, really smart people, and you will not be able to innovate. Because the bottom-up part is only one part of the equation. You need that, but companies never lack ideas. They never lack smart people. Once you have over 100 people, you have innovators, for sure. So what you need to do is create a system where innovators can thrive. And that is, not just, go ahead and buy ping pong tables. You actually need to put in place processes and KPIs that are very structured, but they don't stifle innovation. And again, we now know how to do it. What we need is leadership to embrace that. And it's not always easy because they need a board that's on board and they need investors that fully understand. So as leaders of publicly listed companies, it's very hard.
Right. Those
because
quarterly
you do take
results.
some risk. Yeah.
That's right.
And privately owned companies, I think, are in a better position because they can think longer term, easier. When you're a listed company, it gets a little bit harder. But we have cases where, it has worked, like Microsoft. Amazon, a bit of a different case, or take Tesla because you have the whole who actually makes the decisions. But I think there's an opportunity there. I think the entrepreneurial leaders are the ones that will win in the coming future. The managerial leaders are a dying breed. You need people who can run a company and can envision a future and create the systems to make that future happen.
I love that. And I want to ask you, how would we, so when a company, because what you described that process of giving everybody a little bit of budget, lots of small teams, a little bit of budget, giving them some runway, come back to us with evidence. If there's no evidence, we're going to end the projects. That makes sense for like distributed innovation and probably new products, new services, et cetera.
New business models.
One thing I'd be curious about is like at the top level, when it's for instance for an industry that like you pick any industry, but where it's the level of systems change needed is above like the visibility you would need across the industry, the ecosystem, the organization is more than any one team. Because what you're talking about with the distributed, I think absolutely like applicable, but I think maybe in parallel, I'd be curious your thoughts on if you're going to introduce some kind of vision or idea that would be like making an entirely new like blue ocean strategy or a new growth market that hasn't existed before. Would that come from that same process, or would you say, no, the leadership team, like the actual SLT, has to go through a process of coming up with that vision, like Steve Jobs did?
The vision always comes from the top, right? So I work with one company where the teams are a little bit desperate because there's no overarching vision. So it's
Only
not
one?
just, but where they explicitly mention it, and I said, well, your CEO, needs to start to describe that vision of where he or she thinks that future will be, and then the process actually brings up, the ideas. So it's the same in venture capital. So venture capitalists are not a humble breed, but they even admit they can't pick the winners. So they invest in a portfolio. Now, do they have a vision, an investment kind of, idea of where they want to invest and where they think the world is going? Absolutely.
Right.
So as leaders today, it's what you really need to do is just have a vision of the future, make that very clear, what are the guardrails, and then you get teams to start exploring. So that's the top-down part. So you do need a vision.
Right.
And, I think Steve Jobs is always an interesting example because we think he was like godlike.
Yeah.
He had a lot of failures,
Yeah.
but he also had a clear vision of where the world is going. So what we need from the entrepreneurial leader is to, A, describe where the world is going, how, the leader thinks we should think about the future, where to play, to take Roger Martin's kind of framing. And then the actual roadmap comes from experimentation. The successful projects will emerge. You don't pick the winners, they have to prove themselves. So it's very similar to the startup world, but you do need to create that direction. Because without direction, people will go left and right and nothing will happen.
Right. It's like I always say, it's like if I said, hey, let's go on a road trip, hop in the car, and then we start picking. Okay, well, first let's get some coffee, and then let's get some gas, and then we could go an hour out of the way. If we haven't first programmed where are we trying to go, let's go to coffee, gas, et cetera, on the way to where we're actually trying to go. Right?
And if you take, Microsoft better than I do, but with the leadership change, Satya Nadella had a very clear vision of where to go, like being very open. Did he, describe all of the details? So everything was in exact execution? No. So it's really about the two things. Vision, you got to be careful with vision, right? Because vision and hallucination are very close neighbors. But you need to have that vision and then create the system to enable explorers to explore. So a small anecdote, I had one CEO of a big, medium-sized company, and he was saying, Alex, I get it. I need to infect everybody with the innovation virus. I said, gee, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? I said, no. What you need to do is create a place where innovators can innovate. They know what the process is, they know how to get money, and they know what to do to get more money. If you do that, innovators will innovate. So not everybody needs to be an innovator. So when CEOs say, I want everybody to be an innovator, it's a bit of a broad statement. Yeah, does everybody need to do a little bit of innovation here or that? But that's not the same. Business model innovation and improving the way I work every day at the office, not the same thing.
Right.
So create that system and innovators will innovate. It's not a talent problem. Companies don't have talent problems. They have a system and culture problem.
I could not agree more. And I'd be curious, I want to double click on something you said. You said, just create a vision of where you want to go and then line everyone up and let the explorers explore.
But you do need a system, right? So if you do not have that system, it's going to be hard for explorers. So one of the things we like to do is take a team in a company and ask them, what are all the things you need to do to start innovating? How many roadblocks they have to jump over? And then they, outline it, and then we show that to leaders, and then leaders are, I'm the CEO, and we're all delusional, so we think things are great, but the reality is teams are going through like a lot of, roadblocks to get there. Right. So once you make that explicit and you build the system to take away the blockers, it gets easier. So that you do need to create. Vision alone, again, is not enough. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're so right. You're bringing up memories of Cap Council and other steps that it took to even on relatively low dollar figures just because of 100%.
It's not the money, right? It's rarely the money the problem. It's the corporate antibodies that try to kill you while you're trying to innovate.
So true. And when you mention vision, I want to double click on that because operators, right? Most of us are trained and in school and also at the job. But how to be a good operator, that's how you get into leadership positions is by executing well, right? So what would you say, and I asked Rita the same question, I'd love to get your take on, if you're trying to create a vision in the first place, like you're taking over Microsoft in 2014 and licensing has been the big thing, you need to go somewhere else. What would that process be that you either suggest or maybe guide leaders through to come up with that vision?
I think entrepreneurial leaders and entrepreneurs in general are very good at pattern recognition. So they can take weak signals and put them together and see something others can't. So it's there, but they can't see it. I mean, you can hate or love Elon Musk. I won't take position on that one, but you got to give the guy credit that he saw, for electric vehicles, that there was a future. And, if you take the original entrepreneurs, it wasn't Elon Musk who started the whole thing. It was Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. They had a vision of how electric vehicles could look like. They all looked like golf carts when they started, but they had this vision of a high-performance electric vehicle, basically a German car, but with an electric engine. And they started to put that in place. They talked to people and they started to put these things together and they saw what could be possible. And then, talking about vision and pattern recognition, what Tesla did afterwards is understand that people have certain fears. So they started to say, well, it's not about selling cars. We need to address something else, the pattern of fear, where we're going to build charging stations throughout the US, throughout Europe. So that is pretty bold. Car companies didn't do that, the traditional ones, because they've seen themselves as car companies. But when you start a whole new industry, you actually have to build the infrastructure. That costs a lot of money. So think of it, pattern recognition. Oh, we need to do this, then we need to do that. So understanding all of the pieces to put together. Or Steve Jobs with the iPod first, 1,000 songs in a pocket.
That's right.
Everybody thinks, oh, that was a technology strategy. What people don't know is Steve Jobs saw that if people put 1,000 songs into iTunes onto the iPod, guess what happens? They're trapped.
They're in the ecosystem.
They're in the ecosystem. So it's a business model strategy from the start, knowing that that's the kind of ecosystem, they need to put in place. And understanding how the world is evolving, putting some shape around that and pushing forward. So pattern recognition is the name of the game. And you can practice that. I really do think you can learn from the great innovators. Look at the patterns that they saw. Look at the business models that they started to put in place.
So I want to double click on that again. So I've double clicked once, we're double clicking again, right? Like imagining like a report. We're just keep going deeper. So if you were, let's say I met up with you and I said, okay, Alex, the CEO of XYZ company, they just were named. They're about to take over the company, and they know they want to do pattern recognition. They want to do everything you just described. But like we're going to get in a room and workshop with them or war room with them. That we booked 2 days, and it's just the CEO, let's say, or maybe this SLT. You tell me what you think. But what kind of what can you give me an example? I don't want you to give away your secret sauce of your company, but can you give me an example of an exercise that we would take them through, maybe to do some of that pattern recognition and just start see and think through the future of the industry or not just the industry, but maybe the whole broader context, and then therefore what they should do.
We actually give away all our secret sauce of our company because we're building a platform company. So it's not.
And I want to talk about that after this question.
We're trying to give away the ways of working so that people can use that, and then we help them with our software platform. But I think the first thing is, you already want to understand the different types of innovation and what you're probably going to have to look at if you want to go into the future. So think about R&D. So technology, you need to understand where that is going, sure. But is it then going to lead to new products? Okay, that's easy to copy. So you need to think about new business models. Okay, well, that's already a bit harder for most CEOs. So we need to actually train them to understand business models, and I take the whole leadership team. And then, where the world is really going is transcending industry boundaries. So there's not going to be just a bank anymore. It's going to be a mix between whatever, fashion, and these things
like
are
Apple
merging.
becoming a bank, right?
Apple against Microsoft against Disney. They're all competing in the same spaces with completely different business models. So those boundaries are disappearing, and they will also disappear in B2B, if you're in technology here and all that. So we just need to give them a little bit of an understanding of where they need to play. And business models that transcend industry boundaries is the first thing they need to understand to even be able to have a vision of the future, okay? Then, once they understand that, this is about business model innovation, that's, what we could do. And then here is what transcending industry boundary means. Once they have that understanding, then very simple exercise. You start to map out your business model today, look at that, and then you look at everything that's going on around it, and you just map it out visually. It's like designers creating a mood board. You look at what's going on in the supply chain, what are competitors doing, but also top and bottom of the supply chain, across the supply chain, what's going on. Then you look at, technology, what's going on there, regulation, what's going on there, AI, what can AI enable today? Then you look at customer demands. Where is the world going around customers? What are the trends? Sustainability or away from sustainability like today, but worrying. And then you look at macro. What's the infrastructure that exists today and how is that changing? Once you start to map out that business model environment, you start to look at what are the patterns? What are we seeing? What is going to dramatically influence our company? And then you start to do an assessment. You simply assess your business model today. So we did that recently for AI with a company. We looked at, here's our business model. Let's look at, how this is disrupting our company. And then obvious things come up. Like if they don't have access to data, they're not going to be able to do personalized product for the consumer. They're in consumer goods. They're going to be dead because whoever owns the data of the consumer, and I'm not talking about purchasing data, I'm talking about health data. And you get the health data either in the mouth or a little bit further down. And that's not what some of these consumer companies are not into that health data. They're in purchasing data. So it's relatively straightforward. Understand what innovation is about, map your business model, map the environment, and then start to assess how you might get disrupted, and then develop the vision of the future.
Yeah, so you're really talking about, the systems thinking is such a critical piece of what you're talking about.
Yes.
It's like being able to really understand the complexity and the layers of systems and how they're all interacting, and not just understanding each of them and what they need of your company and the role your company plays, but where they're headed.
Yes.
Right? So it's like a 4D chess.
And that's exactly right what you're saying. That here's the big challenge. Traditionally, companies would hire a consulting firm to make a 590,000 page PowerPoint deck.
To go be stored in a SharePoint that no one ever looks at
and
again.
It's very hard, even if you went to that PowerPoint, it's very hard to get a feeling of the system because you, by definition, you have slides. Like your brain can't process that. So that allusion to design and the mood boards is actually very deliberate. What you need to do is create that wall, or in a software, you create that visible thing where you map everything out. That's how you start to see patterns. You can't see it in a PowerPoint deck.
Yeah.
So senior leaders need to work like designers. And Roger Martin pioneered that, right? So is really that systems thinking, but made simple and practical. Because systems thinking as a word already is super scary. You say that to a leadership team, they're going to run away.
That's right.
So you're just saying, let's map out the environment. Let's assess our business model. You use the words that they already know. Otherwise, they're going to run away.
Couldn't agree more. We're going to play a quick game.
Okay.
We're almost out of time, but I would love for you to pick a scenario out of the hat and then talk about how you would use your frameworks and methodologies in order to address that scenario.
Okay. You get to freeze time and think through solving a major global issue.
So you could even pick the issue if you want, or you could keep it generic.
So a challenge I'm fascinated by is poverty alleviation.
Is what?
Poverty alleviation. So getting rid of poverty in the world. And I think we have the resources. It's just the willpower is now missing, and the leadership probably. So the way I would start to look at that is start to look at all of those cases where business model innovation or new missions. So a group of people started to create the mission model canvas, which is a deviation of the business model canvas, looking at those projects that had success until today, create a library of those projects and make them ultra accessible. Because I do think there are a lot of case studies today, business model innovation or mission model innovation, where teams have already overcome the challenge of poverty alleviation. And now it's just about sharing. Right? So not just ideas, but the projects that have succeeded. And getting the way to do it is actually, I was involved in a project, a not-for-profit, where we took knowledge management from BP and we used that to connect communities. And this was around health, HIV, AIDS, and malaria. And what we did is we took communities that were good on one thing and connected them with communities that wanted to learn about this thing. Put them together. Cut out the middleman, the expert. Just put the real experts, those who've done it, together. I think the same thing could be done here by mapping out business models, missions, value propositions, just making them concrete and tangible, not with text, but with these frameworks to make explicit what did they do, and then put the people, together and boom, you actually start to really solve the problem at scale. So that's
Well, I hope that
definitely
you do that even if you don't get to freeze time, because I think that'd be
I
fantastic.
think, yeah. And so funny enough, we've been, so kind of side project beside the business I'm running, I was looking at doing exactly that, but with sustainability. Because I do think there are quite a few business models that harmonize impact and profit. And having a library of those projects and sharing that would be very powerful.
Absolutely.
We didn't find any investors who were interested in financing that, so we put it on the side, because when you run a company, you're already pretty busy.
That's right.
So
That's right.
you can't kill yourself by adding another
that.
project to it.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer, and I wish we had more time, because I feel like we could talk all day. But thank you so much for joining Future Solving. It's been so great to have you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Great questions. Awesome. Keep on doing this. This is get the best leaders to share.
Okay, will do. Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Well done.
Thank you.